Recording Trumptopia. This is another episode of the Almost Daily Zencast. I am your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. June 1st, 2020. Hello and namaste, friends. Thank you for tuning in. I want to open with the words of Terrence Floyd from earlier today at a memorial service on the site that started all this unrest the last 7 days. Terrence Floyd is the brother of Doug? The brother of Mr. Floyd, who was, of course, killed by police in Minneapolis. While speaking to the crowd of supporters and protesters, he spoke about the dangers of giving in to violence. The brother of George Floyd, Terrence Floyd, reminded us that our anger is like drinking. When we drink, we enjoy it in the moment, but later when we come down off that high, we ask ourselves, what were we doing? He reminded us that, quote, they want us to destroy our stuff. And he implored everyone to consider the following. Let's just do this another way. Let's do this another way. I wasn't directly quoting, but more paraphrasing some of his statements. And I felt a very strong resonance with those statements. It seems to always be the case. The family that is grieving the loss calls for justice, protests and demonstration marches follow, and then things get violent and criminal. And there's a lot of rationalizations and explanations as to why it is okay to torch down mom and pop businesses, why it is okay to loot shopping centers, etc. And I understand them. I'm not here to dismiss them. I'm not here to judge them as anything other than what they are. I'm not here to judge anybody. I understand how one gets to those conclusions. I understand the anger and the emotion and the grief and the passion and the seductive nature of violence. What I am here to do is to stand by some humble suggestions, some simple questions I think we should all ask ourselves, beginning with, what does the system want? Let us not be carried away with enthusiasm for calls of violent revolution before we truly think through not just the implications or our desired outcomes, but the path that got us here. 5,000 years of bloody violent revolution after bloody violent revolution. 5,000 years of human beings butchering each other. 5,000 years of our species fighting itself for peace. I humbly stand by the suggestion that it is perhaps about fucking time that we do something differently. As Terrence Floyd said earlier today, let's do this another way. The thing is, when we come to the precipice of that line of reasoning, we don't know what to do next. And let me tell you, that is not an accident, dear friends. For what does the system want? If you take a deep enough breath and calm yourself thoroughly enough in order to really take a hard look at how we got here, I think it becomes clear through discernment and impartial observation that the system wants our violence. The system wants our hatred. The system wants our complicity. Just like Emperor Palpatine in Star Wars, the real-life system of oppression that keeps the boot of tyranny on all our necks. That system wants us all to be so painfully enraged with hate and violence in our hearts that we can no longer see clearly. That we can no longer see the truth of our spiritual calling. The system of oppression wants us so blinded that we actually engage in the participation of the perpetuation of our own oppression. I shit you not. The system wants you rioting in the streets. Why? Because then it can retaliate. The system wants you torching cop cars. Because then it can retaliate. The system wants you looting mom and pop stores, looting the only grocery store in impoverished neighborhoods, looting the ultra wealthy on, the other end of the tracks. Why? Because then the system can retaliate. Then the system can press its foot of oppression, its boot of oppression, and grind it harder on the backs of all our collective necks. It could beat us down and start shooting at us. I understand all the reasons why people of any creed, color, or ideology have chosen in this moment of historic unrest or in past ones to instigate problems instead of stick with the plan of peaceful demonstrations. Violence is an ego trap. Violence is a devourer of souls. It only creates more violence. Choosing it is self-destructive. The system wants us fighting amongst each other. The system wants us armed to the teeth and willing to shoot first and think later. The system wants us so pent up and frustrated that we do not perceive any other viable choice than to take violent action. And the system has set itself up in order to be the victim and therefore rightful defendant whenever we, the people, choose violence against it. I know. Especially in the case of the United States of America. Although my comments are addressed to the planet at large, to the species as a whole, I do acknowledge that I'm sort of grounded and surrounded by the American version of the system. And in the American version of the system, we have this mysterious, sanctified, yet severely oppressive, glorified, yet horribly flawed document that even in our anger and in our longing for revolution and rebellion, we cling to. We cling to this document. We praise it. We revere it. We accuse each other of wanting to shred it up. And yet we do not fully understand it. We do not realize that this document was written by the oppression and is a tool of the oppressors, as much as it is a glorious representation of what we have won by fighting for our rights. The system wants us caught up in fighting for our rights because it can manage and profiteer off of that fight. Once we have exhausted this line of questioning, we are left with a very important question, which we have been categorically neglecting. What is it that the system fears? It does not fear our violent revolution. It sold us the guns we would use in a violent revolution. The system does not fear our rioting in the streets. It peddled all the media that filled us with the thoughts that that would make a difference. We are left with a question. As I said, we have been categorically neglecting and failing to address, what does the system fear? It doesn't fear our anger, it stokes it. It doesn't fear our hatred and rage, it feeds us more fuel. The system, like Senator Palpatine, is grinning as we rage and giggling and encouraging us to feed upon our own bitter anger. I'll tell you what the system fears. The system fears our healing. The system fears our recollection of divinity in all of us. Our system fears our reconnecting with our cosmic soul network. The system fears us choosing to heal ourselves and to heal each other, and therefore, and this is the important step that people just don't seem to want to wrap their brains around whenever I share it at them. So help me, friends, those of you who get it, help me by deepening your own understanding. The system fears that if we realize that through healing ourselves, we gain the ability to heal each other, and when we heal each other, we gain the ability to heal the entire human species, that will heal the system. We can keep fighting against the system. We can keep raging against the system. We can keep burning the petty things the system puts in front of us to burn down. As one brilliant meme points out this week, y'all are burning down the wrong buildings. The system cajoles us and manipulates us to this choice, dangling in front of us the seductive ego traps of violence and vengeance and retribution, so that we will neglect and ignore the spiritual calling to dig deep within and figure out for ourselves organically how to work that healing magic that was taught to us by Yeshua, taught to us by Buddha, taught to us by every enlightened master that ever woke up and said, oh shit, you guys, we're doing this all wrong. We should be focusing on healing, and the system will reform itself once we heal the species. The system will continue to win for as long as we choose to fall for its seductive ego traps of violent revolution. Because the system's pretty savvy, yo. And this system, whatever other name you like to call it, Illuminati, etc., 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 the system of oppression goes deeper and is more sublimely subtle than any group or any individual we might pin the blame on. The system is in the spiritual network of the human species. The system of oppression originates in the ethereal planes, where light and dark are working out their differences as they struggle for healing and reintegration. If we do not comprehend the real origin of the corruption, the real origin and source of hate and violence and oppression, we will not be able to heal ourselves and each other and the species. If we continue to fall for the ego traps and neglect our spiritual healing, we will continue to only make little tiny baby step gains, which the system will dole out to us, that we will pat ourselves on the back for and then go back to working for the system. I do not say this with anger or judgment in my heart. I say this with a deep sense of tragic sadness that for 5,000 years, this has been the debate. For 5,000 years, we have debated whether or not butchering and killing the bad guys is the solution to the problem, or remembering how to heal ourselves, each other, and the species. For 5,000 years, we have been arguing this argument. And for 5,000 years, we have allowed ourselves as a species to get cajoled, seduced, manipulated, and led down the path of darkness, of anger, of jealousy, of retribution, of grievance. Pain is real. I'm not saying that it isn't. But we must understand what the system does if we're ever to transcend it. The system profits on our violence. The system profiteers on our conflict. The system engineers these divisions on purpose. That is the meaningfulness of us versus them. That indoctrination wants you to feel a righteousness in belonging to whatever us you've subscribed to, and a vile hatred for all of them over there. And the sick part is that it works most powerfully on those who are truly suffering and have genuine and authentic grievance. Us versus them, poor versus rich, right versus left, white versus black, criminal versus cops, Muslim versus Christian, Buddhist versus Rohingya, colonists versus natives, atheists versus believers, vegans versus meat eaters, lone wolves versus sheeple, democracy versus totalitarianism, terrorists versus freedom fighters, gun control versus gun rights, flat earthers versus globalists, Russians versus Americans, statists versus anarchists, ideology versus ideology, party versus party, you versus me versus you, everybody versus everybody. That's the pattern. That is not the natural order of things. We are all brothers and sisters in one family called humanity. So none of these labels versus the other labels are the natural order of things. None of these conflicts are just organic parts of human nature. They are engineered, manufactured, and created for the purposes of profiteering on the conflict generated. And I say that with all due respect to whoever finds themselves in whichever of those identity labels, suffering whatever real suffering they may be going through. Life is suffering. Our minds seem keyed towards creating suffering. And arguably, the system of oppression is so well aware of that it creates these opportunities by working within us for, I do not mean a network of evil bad guys out there. I mean the darkness in us all. The yin of the yang, right? The light is in all of us, as is the darkness. And our misunderstanding of their struggle, the light and the dark, is what creates this meat grinder paradigm in this hallucination we call reality. And the system which has a simple goal: to perpetuate this illusion for as long as possible. To keep us here in the meat grinder of birth and death and rebirth and death and rebirth and death for as long as possible. I'm not saying that logistical efforts here in the real world dimension of everyday pragmatism must be abandoned. I'm saying we must choose more wisely how we perceive this entire paradigm. We must lift our eyes up from the muck and the mire that the system has forced our vision to limit itself to. Because it does not matter how you self-identify. It does not matter which political party you choose to belong to. It does not matter. Not if you are subsequently giving into the seduction to take up violent action. No matter what the rationalization. It was best, I think this makes the most brilliant case for it. This simple sentence: we murder murderers, becoming murderers ourselves, to show other people that murdering people is wrong. We can either continue murdering each other, or we can transcend that paradigm of butchering ourselves There is no more sacred work than this. Doing the opposite is giving in to the illusion, giving in to the system of oppression, and participating in its perpetuation by choosing to avoid, neglect, ignore the methodology, the practice, the action, the tool that would lead to our species-wide transcending of this entire system. I implore you, friends, no matter where you are, and no matter which side you identify with, I implore you, I beg you, I humbly invite you to consider the suggestion that by healing ourselves, we become the healers of others, and in doing so, we heal the planet, the whole species. And that this is not highfalutin, hippie, new age, woo-woo nonsense. This is what the system of oppression spends all of its time, energy, and effort in to distract you from, to seduce you into believing cannot be possible, to convince you that this is malarkey. Why would they do that? Why would they spend so much effort in convincing the world that love is fleeting, that forgiveness is weakness, and that healing is impotent? Because they fear the power we would gain if we truly anchored ourselves in unconditional love, absolute forgiveness, and transformative healing. If we stepped from that center out into the world, out onto the streets, to speak truth to power, let me rephrase that sentence. To speak truth to those in self-described positions of authority. If we were to do that profoundly, deeply, at an exponentially growing level, we, the people, would step into the world with such power that the system of oppression would tumble and collapse under the weight of its own inability to oppress us anymore. And I hear even spiritual people arguing against healing. And I'm not here to shame them or call them out. I'm here to beg them to reconsider their own logic. I have been informed by self-proclaimed spiritual healers that we cannot heal yet because of this or that. Someone gave me the analogy that we would not put a bandage with salve on a wound with a thorn in it. We would remove the thorn first. And in that analogy, removing the thorn was meant to imply burning the cities to the ground as some effective methodology of ending police brutality. Forgive me for not being able to convince myself that that would work. I do not think logically, rationally, emotionally, spiritually, logistically, religiously, humanistically, I do not think that would work. Because the moment we engage in burning the city down is the moment where we prove ourselves willing to be as criminal as the criminals who oppress us. If we're going to murder murderers, we become murderers ourselves. And therefore, by our own logic, worthy of being murdered. Rather, if we became healers, each and every one of us, if each and every one of us stepped into the awakening realization that we are indeed all healers, that you and I, each and every one of us, no matter how flawed, no matter how imperfect, no matter how outraged or dispassionately, jadedly, cynically, bitterly done with the world, our calling remains to step into our healer status, to become that which Christos showed us by example how to be. This is, my friends, in my opinion, after 30 some odd years of paying attention to the world, what the system fears the most. And so it mocks us for speaking like this. It ridicules us and conditions you to treat us like fools, like people that must be neglected and ignored in the height of your passion. But I will stand by this statement. Our calling is to become the healers that we are all meant to be. In doing so, we will achieve the goals that we dream of. We will transcend the system that we're fighting. We will unite as one people in a way that cannot be denied or rejected or debunked. For as we heal ourselves and each other and the species, the clearer each and every one of us as individuals will be able to recognize the divinity in each and every other human individual. Yes, including all the bad guys. But as they are healed, they will achieve that same transcendence. Call me crazy, but that's what I think is at the root source of the messages that every enlightened master that inspired all the religious faiths that became corrupted organized religions that are now part of the system of oppression came here to teach us. They didn't come here from elsewhere. They came from within the human fractal. They came from inside ourselves to show us a shining, living, breathing example of what it is we have forgotten we can become. As we move forward, we cannot just return to, quote, normalcy. We cannot just accept whatever paltry and pathetic political solutions are offered us. We cannot be satisfied with the baby step of X or Y or Z. We must reach deeper. We must go further. We must bring ourselves into that elusive liminal space that is the seat of our divinity. And from that place, we can recognize each other as one another. Instead of talking about it, we can be doing it. So, I beg you, dear friends and listeners, take the time. Take the time to set down your political ideology. Take the time to forgive your fucked up past. Take the time to hold yourself accountable for your flaws and your failures and your transgressions. take the time to forgive those who have been flawed in front of you, who have transgressed against you, who have failed you. Take the time to heal. No matter where you are, no matter what your life circumstances, you have the power to heal yourself. Us versus them is a lie, because it indoctrinates us, all of us, to see each other as the enemy. Of course, it is undeniable that people choose to do horrible things to other people. But have we dug deep enough to find out why? No. We're too busy fighting over things. 5,000 years of fighting for peace. Do we have peace? 5,000 years of fighting for justice. Do we have justice? 5,000 years of fighting for freedom. Is this what freedom is, friends? I do not think so. I think we have forgotten where peace comes from. It is not something that we take. It is not something that we win. It is not something that we create through violence. It is something we must pour out of ourselves. We have forgotten what real justice is, and we are caught up in wanting vengeance and revenge. We have forgotten what real freedom is. For it is not being able to do as you please whenever the fuck you please, just because you want to. Freedom has little to next to nothing to do with physical context. Freedom is not taken away from us when we are oppressed, unless we allow ourselves to believe it has been. Freedom, like peace, like love, is something that springs forth from within us when we look to the right wellspring within our many-layered inner self. When we look for the source of love within our spiritual framework, we will find it deep within. When we look for the source of peace within our own phenomenological field of being, we will find it there. When we look for freedom, we will discover that it cannot be out there somewhere in the illusion of Maya, in the thing we call material reality. It can only reside deep inside. And so if we are truly to establish peace, love, and freedom for ourselves and for the entire species, we must choose healing above all else. We must reject violence. We must abdicate vengeance. We must turn to each other with open hearts and pour forth forgiveness. We must come to understand what it means to step into our role as healers. For that is what our mother wants. That is what our father wants. But we have fooled ourselves like naughty little bratty asshole children into believing that the game is about punching each other in the face and winning. I beg for forgiveness from all those that I have ever hurt. I beg for forgiveness from all those that I have ever misrepresented myself to, that I've ever spoke to without thoughtful choosing of my words. I beg forgiveness of the world for my flaws and failures. And I genuinely, authentically offer my forgiveness to all those that have ever crossed my path and offered me violence, judgment, bitterness, betrayal, pain. And I humbly beg and implore that you consider doing the same. That you consider stepping up into the calling of taking on your profound, your much needed, your divine birthright of becoming a healer. As always, friends, I thank you for tuning in and listening. And I welcome you to join me on the social media. You can find me on Facebook. That's where I'm most active. The Incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, or the Almost Daily Zencast. And as always, friends, I pray that peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart, and that your cup runneth over with forgiveness and unconditional love for yourself, all those around you, and the whole goddamn stupid clusterfuck of talking monkeys we call our human family. And may we finally grow up out of this pathetic, petty little place we've been in for 5,000 years and step into the growth, the uplifting, the transcendence,